Hi to the three of you who have made it so far. Welcome. So given how many of us are here, you're welcome to jump on audio chat if you prefer, or just do text chat, whatever you want. So I don't have a whole lot of prepared material for you. I just wanted to kind of create a space for us to get together live and chat. How's it going? How are your essays going, I guess, more specifically? I'd also be interested in your thoughts on the exam. So I don't have a clear plan for what to do about our exam. Obviously, in-person exams are not happening. Something online. So we got a few choices. We could do, I mean, we do have the option of just canceling the exam. I think that's less than having talked with Byron, the head of the philosophy department. He convinced me that that's less than optimal for students who are hoping to sort of increase their mark over their term work. That's, taking away the exam is taking away one of their choices. We could potentially do an optional exam. So for anybody who wants to do an exam, you can, and for anybody who doesn't, you can just not. That's a possibility. I don't know. Curious about your thoughts. And if you don't want to chat about that, we could talk about philosophy of biology. First off, can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
If the exam were to happen, would it be open book then? Obviously, because it's online.
I mean, yeah.
All the volumes off.
Okay, I unmuted you. So you come into this thing automatically muted. You can unmute yourself, or I can unmute you. So okay. Welcome. So we're just talking about sort of possibilities for the exam. Yeah, it would obviously be open book, so I'd have to kind of rethink the format of it. Maybe like more in-depth questions rather than stuff that you could sort of look up in the slides. And there's also the question of whether we want it to be mandatory or not. So for my critical thinking class, I made the exam a kind of an assignment that replaces the exam and made it optional. So anybody who's satisfied with their mark from the term work can just not do it. That's a possibility as well. You can go for that. Yeah. Oh, hi. Good.
That's why, yeah, I'm actually under his student name thing.
Right. Cool. Okay, so for the optional exam option, will we have the final essay marks before deciding if we want to do the exam to boost our marks? Good question. When did I say the final essay is due exactly? Just looking that up right now.
Originally it was for the 30th, but I think some of us have extensions.
Yeah, so I've been handing out extensions pretty liberally. If you need an extension, you're certainly welcome to just get in touch. So if it's the 30th, then I can get your final marks back to you before the exam. So the exam would be something like the middle of April. So April 14th, I think, was the original plan. Mm-hmm. So I could pretty straightforwardly get your final marks back to you at least before the exam would be due. So.
Yeah.
assuming you didn't get an Epic extension. No. Okay, so maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll do an optional exam of more in-depth questions. You'd have like a day or something to answer them. It would be open book, obviously, that kind of thing.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just so it gives people some choice. I mean, mine isn't, my essay wouldn't be due until the 13th, so I wouldn't know.
Right.
But it's good to just have the option. Also, how many questions would you want to put in the exam?
I don't know.
If it
I don't know.
would last for a day.
Yeah, it would be a day, so I think it would be, but it wouldn't be like a day's worth of work, I hope. I would be more like
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, a few kind of essay style questions, maybe kind of broad ranging questions about philosophy of science in general. I think would be the plan.
Yeah, I think that's a better plan. Yeah, because a lot of people are obviously in different circumstances with the papers and exams, and it's the option sounds inclusive.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So that gives us maximum flexibility. Like if you're reasonably satisfied with your term mark, then you can just say, okay, good enough. Call it a day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would we notify you if we're not taking it? Or?
So the setup I had for so I've actually made decisions about one of the other class I have for an exam 4. I've actually made decisions about it. So the deal would be, if you don't want to do the exam, you just don't do it, and then I'll see that you. So it would be an online submission. You submit something to Blackboard, and then if there's nothing there, then that's my signal that you decided not to do the exam, and I can just reweight the marks from the rest of the course. That would be the plan.
Okay.
So you can make a quite last minute decision about that.
Time is like not really a thing anymore. Like it's hard.
That's very true.
Yeah.
What is time these days?
What's a day? I don't know.
The only
If
reason
I'm
I know
awake.
the dates is because of my due dates.
Right. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So we'll do that. It'll be an optional exam, maybe a couple of essay style questions. You'll have 24 or 48 hours to do it, and then we'll make it sort of April 15th, April 16th, or something like that, so that I have time to get anybody who hands their essay in on time-ish. I'll be able to get your marks back to you, so you can make an informed decision about whether you want to do it or not. Good.
Sweet.
The 6 of you who showed up just decided that for the rest of the class.
Well, I mean, I don't have anything better to do. Obviously, I don't know what people are doing that's exciting right now, but
honestly, probably just not anything. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I don't have tons and tons to do right now, but I'm struggling to get it all done still.
Yeah.
I'm working at maybe 50% of my normal capacity, and I feel like that's all I got in me right now. So
yeah, you just kind of lose all sense of reality, and then you're either like checking the news 20,000 times, or just trying to forget about it.
Yep.
So you said in class, you said that you would do a reading and then you digest it by walking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm scared to walk sometimes.
Never seen people cross the street to avoid me before. I'm 5 feet.
Yeah.
Is everybody just like running away as soon as they come?
Yep. So yeah, hard to do that kind of like calm, non-active processing stuff that philosophy is made of. Yeah. It's safe to walk around though.
Yeah. Still.
Yeah, as long as you wash your hands and such and blah blah blah. Don't touch your face.
Yeah.
We'll try to walk every day and Facebook and stuff, but there are a lot of people on the pathways doing the same thing.
Yeah. Just never seen so many people aimlessly wandering around outside. You know that it's aimless, you know.
Yep, just for the sake of getting outside.
Yeah.
I hope we're all getting outside on the regular.
We're going to go outside after, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good idea. It's a really good idea. Yeah. some kind of, you gotta have, we're all gonna have to really impose structure on ourselves, so that we can not slowly fall apart.
Yeah, and sleep is everywhere. Like a few friends are also like, what is time anymore? Because people have been sleeping in later or like staying up later, and it's just like, oh no. Like, and I don't want to fall into that because like you know, I have other assignments to do too, but it's just so hard when you don't like actually have it. Like you don't go out and do something. Yeah, there's no.
Yeah, yeah. So you gotta impose it on yourself. You gotta be your own like manager here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, all of this is very much making me think of what we talked about in class, the kind of the way in which things that are very regular in your environment quickly become invisible to you. The kind of patterns and routines that have always been there are the unknown knowns of your existence. And a whole bunch of that stuff has become very visible again in ways that I've never experienced before. Yeah, so like I realized that I'd never seen the back of the shelves at the grocery store before.
Yeah.
Never. I'm 38. I've never seen the back of those shelves. Now I have.
No, everybody's just, yeah, wrong class for this maybe, but everybody's just kind of being struck again and again and again, I think, by the absurdity of existence, or human life at least, just by all these encounters with, yeah, like you said, disturbances and familiarities that we didn't even know were there.
Yeah.
And the lack of toilet paper.
We actually have toilet paper.
That's good. That's good.
That's good.
Haley asks, I lost track of the chat for a second. Haley asks, what's the latest date we can submit the essay in order to still have the mark back before the exam? So hard to put a clear deadline on that, just because I don't know how many people will be submitting on time. Maybe I can get back to you on the 30th. So on the 30th, I'll know, or the 31st, I'll know for sure how many essays I'll have on time to kind of get marking. And then I'll know. So the only constraint is how much marking can I do. I think, sorry, let me look at the calendar really quick. So if the exam is on the 16th, let's say, 1 2 weeks. So let's say April 10th is probably the last day that I can reasonably guarantee that you'll have your mark back before the exam. So yeah, we'll say the 10th. Just write that down. So yeah. So yeah, I'll say April 10th, kind of slightly optimistically. Yeah. How will the weight of the exam be divided into the other assignments if we choose not to do it? Another good question. Typically reweight things just evenly. So I'll just divide the weight of the exam by, let's see, 3 in this case. So just add 10% to the other elements of the course. So we would have the midterm be worth 25%, short essay worth 30%, and the final essay worth 45%. It's a lot of weight on the final essay. So that's, I mean, it does increase the sort of pressure on you to write a really good final essay if you choose not to do the exam. Yeah, so doing that exam might be a good option for a lot of people. I think that's it might be a strategically good move to sort of take a shot at it. You'll also be able to, so here's the thing that you'll be able to do. I haven't got the essay questions thought up for the exam yet, but you'll be able to just jump on Blackboard and look at the essay questions on the 15th, let's say. And if they're just utterly intimidating and you have no interest in trying to do them, then you can make the decision that you don't want to do them. Yeah. So, yeah. I should also say we got some clarity on when the final marks have to be in. I believe the last day that I'm allowed to submit final marks is May 2nd. So you'll have all of your marks back by then at the latest. Good. How long would the answer to the essay questions be? A couple pages, probably, something like that. I'll come up with a better. That's a question I should give some more thought to. This is a plan that's developing as we're doing this chat. So, how long should the essay answers be? I will get back to you with a clearer answer on that. Yeah, I'll have to send out a message sort of describing the plan to the rest of the class. There's a very small percentage of the class actually in this chat. So I will come up with some better answers to these questions and send out an email. How are your essays coming?
I wish there were still classes. You know, it's not the same when you're just trying to read it to yourself, and then like we go on our walks and we try to talk to each other about each other's stuff. Yep. But it's usually one person gets through all their stuff and we have some talk about it, and then that person's, you know, just philosophically exhausted.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's kind of like a mutual harassment thing.
You're lucky you have another person in the class to talk to. Actually, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. I'm working on another assignment actually, but I'm still like trying to find the great resources for this one. I know there's like already 3 because I wanted to talk about Popper and Kuhn, and I'm gonna go off of those, like certain readings in class and like those kinds of things, but
yep.
And also my astrobiology textbook, but I just still need to find a few more. I feel like I would still benefit that. Obviously, like I've been on Phil papers for like so many days now trying to find them. So that's where I'm at, because I'm also worried about another assignment. So
Albin asks, so the long essay won't be marked by the exam? Yes, it will be. Assuming that especially if you handed it on time, like absolutely guarantee it will be marked before the exam. The last possible date to hand it in to get it probably marked before the exam is April 10th. So yeah, I'll have to kind of buckle down to get that done, but that should be possible. Who knows? I guess I'll be done teaching by then, so I will have nothing else to do at that point. But again, I mean, I hesitate to sort of apply my normal productivity to this period because I am not. No, I used to have a life. Yeah. Now I have an apartment and some hobbies. Yeah.
It's weird trying to figure out if it's okay to. It's like, oh, should I take up a hobby or should I force myself to just keep being productive because there's no.
Yeah. I'm going with hobbies. I don't. The thought of trying to like force productivity at the moment is daunting to me. So.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I mean, I've been playing a lot of D&D, a lot more than normal, so that says something about me, I guess.
Oh, I mean, it's a hobby. Yeah. Alvin hasn't seen the light of day in weeks. Alvin, go outside. It's still safe to go outside.
Yeah, at least get some fresh air.
Yeah.
Alvin, okay?
Yeah, you're right, Alvin.
Oh, there's a chat. I see it now.
There is a chat. Yeah, there's a text chat as well if you don't want to chime in on audio.
Oh no. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, eat vegetables.
The stuff that I'm doing research on and I've been doing a lot of research on for the past, I want to say, year and a half. What I'm working on mostly, like we talked about over email, and specifically, I found like the canon resources, and those ones that I'm using as secondary sources mostly, because I find like the other random papers, I'm reading through them, and there's not really that. They just don't seem to be good enough to like be I don't know, like applied into the paper that I'm trying to do. Like they're interesting, but they're not. So I'm trying to find more canon, is what I'm saying. So I've looked at like Worrell, and there was this one paper that I read by a person named Ladyman.
Oh yeah. Ladyman. So Nick, do you mind if I describe your essay project briefly? Or just the area that you're in? So this is something that we, Nick's working on something we didn't really talk about in class, which is scientific realism, which is the question about whether our theories are literally true or whether they just make good predictions. So this is an issue in philosophy of science, a general philosophy of science that people have been arguing about for like decades now. And there's pretty good, there's annoyingly good arguments on both sides. So the no miracles argument says it would be a miracle if our theories were just completely wrong, but they made all good predictions. So therefore they must be at least sort of true. And then there's the pessimistic meta-induction, which says all of our past theories have been wrong. So what makes you think these ones are right? And those are they're both really good arguments for exactly the opposite conclusion. And then there's people that try to accommodate both of them. So the structural realists are a group of people that try to accommodate both of those arguments. That's the general topic.
Yeah. That's actually, I'm focusing on Psilos's rejection of structuralism, and I'm rejecting his rejection.
Right on. Cool. Good.
I'm thinking, and it's interesting. Layman's got like some interesting arguments.
Yeah. So I think it's Ross and Ladyman wrote the latest famous iteration of this, which is ontic structural realism, which says something like, so Worrell develops the first version of structural realism, which says all you can know about is the relations between things, not the things themselves. And then Ross and Ladyman in this book called Everything Must Go say, actually, there are no things themselves. There's just relations, or something like that. Which is a very strange position.
Yeah, it's such a metaphysical position that I actually, after I read it, I wrote a lot of notes down, almost just laughing at the idea. Like this seems absurd, but like just absolutely insane. And because I don't know how that works at all. Like, what is a relation to something grounding it?
What does it mean for relations without relata? They say.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very weird idea.
Yeah,
so,
well, that's interesting though. That one's the one that I'm focusing on, or not focusing on, but using as another source.
Yeah.
But I've only got 4 sources, and I know it said 5, so I'm trying to find one more.
4 well-used sources, and then just throw in something that they cite or something like that. Okay. So you don't have to draw heavily on 5 sources. You just have to have 5 sources.
Okay.
Oh dang! I wrote a lot about 4.
Okay, great. Then just throw in one more that they cite. That's plenty. You can write a good essay with one source, really. Like if you deeply and carefully engage with one source, that's more than enough for 3,000 words. So if you've got 4 that you're actually engaging with, that's great. And just cite some literature. You do a little literature review. This person talked about it, and that person talked about it, and now we'll talk about my sources. So, yeah, that's great. So the lesson for those of you listening in is that you don't actually have to write something specifically from the course content, so long as it's broadly related to philosophy of science. So this realism stuff we didn't talk about it at all in class, but it's a big topic in philosophy of science. So if there's something in philosophy of science more broadly that you're interested in, you're welcome to write on that, just as a general invitation.
Freedom is horrifying.
Yeah. Luckily, I was just really just
This.
Yeah. Anybody else got essay projects on the go? Oh, who's got Haley's written in the chat. Thinking about doing my essay on the Dober criterion forensic scientist with respect to Popper's falsification criterion. I don't know what the Dober criterion forensic science is, so you'll have to explain that to me when you're doing your essay. Wondering, a little confused about his falsification criterion and wondering if you could explain it, ideally with an example from forensic science. I don't know anything about forensic science. I've watched some TV shows where they do this stuff, but I can try to take a shot at the falsification criterion. That bit I know about. Okay, so Popper's falsification criterion, trying to separate science from pseudoscience. If you're doing within a science, so some specific test or something, what the formulation would be something like, could this test be shown to be faulty? So what kind of evidence would show you that the test doesn't work? Like, I don't know, with fingerprinting. So fingerprinting is supposed to be diagnostic of who touched the object. And if you can always find a way to attribute that fingerprint to that person, then it's not a good test. Right? So what makes fingerprinting a good diagnostic test is that what would show that it's a bad test. Yeah. So not that somebody has to have come up with evidence that it's a bad test, but you know what that evidence would look like. Does that make sense? I don't know what the Dober criteria in forensic science are.
I thought it's to do with federal law and rules of evidence regarding the admissibility of expert witness testimony. A special motion raised before or during a trial, but that doesn't sound like forensics. It probably is related then.
Yeah, and the law part of it, I guess.
So under the Dober standard, the factors that may be considered in determining whether a methodology is valid are, so this is interesting. So there's a legal demarcation criterion. Mm-hmm. That's what it sounds like. Is that a reasonable parsing with what this thing is? What have I done with my chat? Yeah. If evidence is admissible in court. Oh, cool. Okay, so that's interesting. That's interesting. So you might not even have to do so. Like you don't even have to relate it to Popper. You could just say, oh, people are saying that Dober criteria is based off Popper's falsification. Okay, interesting. Let's see. Under the Dober standards, whether the theory or technique can be and has been tested, whether it's subjected to peer review and publication, its known or potential error rate, the existence and maintenance of standards controlling its operation, and whether it's attracted widespread acceptance within the relevant scientific community. So this is much more stringent than Popper's criterion. So one of the criticisms of Popper's criterion is you can pass it without being what we would regard as good science. So flat Earth theory, we talked a bit about in class, passes Popper's demarcation criterion just fine, because we know what kind of evidence. All he requires is that you know what kind of evidence would show that your theory is wrong. For example, astronauts going into space and seeing a round Earth. That's the kind of evidence that shows that flat Earth theory is wrong. Or demonstrations of the curvature of the Earth. That's the kind of evidence that shows that flat Earth is wrong. So Popper doesn't require that you have seen that evidence and your theory is shown to be right. He just requires that you know what kind of evidence it would be, which is a pretty weak criterion in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So Popper's got kind of loose standards for what gets to count as science. This Dober criteria is much more stringent. It's much more stringent. So they're saying So the first one that I'm just Googled this briefly from, so Cornell Law School says whether the theory or technique in question can be and has been tested. So Popper's criterion is entirely the first half of that first out of 5 criteria that it can be tested. So Popper's criterion is in there, but it's 1/10 or something like that of the Dover criteria. They add in a whole bunch of other stuff, which I think people kind of mentally fill in when they're thinking about Popper. Whether it's been subjected to peer review and publication, known or potential error rate, existence and maintenance of standards controlling its operation, whether it has attracted widespread acceptance within a relevant scientific community. So number 5 sounds a lot like Kuhn to me, actually. So Kuhn uses the, something as science if it's part of a scientific paradigm, which is to say that it's something that they're using to do puzzle solving. So the Dover criteria seems much more stringent, much more complex, and much more based on kind of not logical criteria, but it's not that they're illogical, but it's more like, what are the facts of the matter about the state of this method? Anyway, that's a very interesting topic. That'll be an interesting essay. So I would certainly say that this is not exactly Popper's criterion. It's much more involved than Popper's criterion. So cool. Is that helpful? I'm sorry, I don't know anything about forensic science except what I saw on, LA Law or whatever. That's too old of a crime show. Good. Yeah. Please do email me if you got any kind of questions, or if you want to send me an outline or anything like that. Yeah, be very welcome to. Good.
I was just gonna ask about the whole outline thing too.
Yeah, you're welcome to send me. My only rule is I can't read complete drafts, but I'm happy to read outlines, or like if you read an abstract or something like that. So it's mentally helpful to write an abstract. So one paragraph where you try to summarize your topic, your thesis, and your argument. Try to compress it down as tight as you can, because that sort of forces you to have a mental picture of the whole thing. People very often get themselves in trouble by you just start writing and see where it goes. It's not a bad technique for writing, but that's not how you get a nice clean draft of your paper, for sure. Yeah. Mitchell. So somebody's asking if they have personalized questions about marking schemes and due dates. You're welcome to ask it here. If you've got a question, there's a chance that it might be helpful to other people. So you're welcome to join Zoom.
I was just curious. I wasn't here for the midterm, right? So I don't have that mark. So I just didn't know where that was being assigned.
Right. So typically what I do is sort of take whatever the weight of the thing is and divide it evenly between the other elements of the course. So the midterm is 15%. We would redistribute it to 5% to each of the other elements of the course. And for those of you who weren't here at the very beginning of this chat, we talked a little bit about the exam, which is now officially optional. So if you're already if you're satisfied with the marks that you've got so far in the course, you have the choice to just not write the exam. Just because things are a bit, I don't know if you've been following the news at all, things are a bit hectic right now.
So that means I would have it split between just 2 marks if I didn't do the exam?
Just 2 marks, yeah. So I would encourage, if you've already had something redistributed, I would encourage you to go ahead and do the exam, just so that it's not too much on 1 or 2 things.
Right, and then is the due date for the final essay strictly the 30th, or do we?
No. I'm handing out extensions like candy. There's no. Yeah, I'm hoping I'll get some of them on the 30th so that I can start marking them. But yeah, no, if you need an extension, if you want an extension, just email me. Yeah, that's totally fine. Email me so I have a record of it, basically.
All right, sounds good.
Cool. Anybody else got essay projects they're working on?
I do.
Yeah.
Wait,
What-
it's
what-
unmuted. Yeah.
Same. Oh yeah. Miranda, I think we're in the same class when it comes to existentialism, because that's the one I'm working on right now.
Oh yeah. No,
Yeah.
I was trying not to like sink into the boredom and lethargy right away. So
Mhm.
I got way too into that one really early, and then I finished it, and then I was like, oh, what do I do now?
You write my essay.
So yeah, now I'm writing this one.
Sorry,
mhm.
which one is it?
Oh, which essay or which topic?
Yeah, which topic?
I am having a hard time narrowing down like a specific thing that I want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But I was reading about the philosophy of biology and stuff, and all of the different attempts to kind of like fill the holes in Darwinism and try to make it seem applicable.
Cool.
And
cool.
With the whole thing about the problem of the teleological
Mm-hmm.
explanations and how that's all that we can seem to find in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And just a few different things to think about.
Cool.
One,
Cool.
if this is kind of the way nature is and we can't find a way to explain it other than this, then maybe there's some necessarily anthropomorphic component to the way that we're trying to force our kind of way of thinking on things. And if that's the case, then what does that say? It talks about in your slides stuff, you talk about how some people think that evolution in biology is just a contingent thing, like it just kind of happened by chance. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case, but it seems like all of our very different and seemingly good and applicable different ways of explaining it are contingent, maybe not so much on it as on something about us. And so maybe there's something going on there, but I can't quite put my finger on it.
Interesting. Okay, so the topic of the last lecture I'm going to do is, or no, sorry, not the last lecture, second last lecture. So there'll be two more lectures. The next one is on functional explanations or teleological explanations. So maybe there'll be something in there you can kind of latch onto.
That would be nice.
Good. Okay, so that's my project for the rest of this week is basically to put out an essay or a recorded lecture on functional or teleological explanations. So,
oh, cool.
Good. That was actually my my PhD advisor, who's like your philosophy dad. His passion was he's like the guy who's defending the idea that there are real teleological explanations in the world. So he does a pretty intense sort of like look at causal explanations and tries to argue that the teleological explanations meet everything that we want from causal explanations, but just flipping cause and effect in time or something like that. And he thinks that, so he's made this is Dennis Walsh, who's my PhD advisor. He continues to make a career out of trying to argue that if you don't think about living things in terms of agency and goal directedness, then you're missing something essential about living things. Like there's you don't need goal directed talk for anything except organisms, but if you're going to deal with organisms, then you cannot you can't explain or understand them unless you understand them as trying to thrive and survive, something like that. And his latest work, I'll probably talk about this in the recorded lecture, is largely about, so there's kind of been a shift in evolutionary theory over the last 20, 30 years. So there's a huge debate about this within evolutionary biology. As of the 70s or something like that, evolutionary biology was all about genes that determine our behavior, and it was supposed to be that, or like how our bodies work and how we behave, and it was supposed to be that genes are kind of just random products of mutation. So there's nothing that explains why we have the genes that we do, except for selective pressure, like filtering for genes. He and a bunch of other people are arguing that actually it's the structure of a living thing that determines how your genes act. So, like, in some sense, the organism drives gene change rather than gene change driving organisms. I'll have to get into this in some depth to make it make sense, but like, we learned a lot about the genome over the last 30 years. So, like, for example, you've got all the same gene, you've got all of your genes are in all of your cells, right? Every cell in your body's got your entire genome in it. But your liver cells are acting way different than your skin cells, or acting way different than your bone cells. And that difference is just a difference in the way that they're being made to be active. So what each cell is doing is realizing a different set of potentials in the genome. One metaphor so we used to think of the genome as like a computer program. But maybe a better metaphor is it's more like a musical instrument. So rather than being a computer program with 30,000 lines of code, it's like a musical instrument, or like an organ, like a keyboard with 30,000 keys on it. And it can play a whole bunch of different tunes. And the way that you, the organism, are trying to survive determines which song you play with your genes, rather than it being kind of a script that every single cell follows. So that means that the way that your genes interact with the environment, and therefore the effect of your genes on your fitness, depends very much on how you, the whole organism, are organized and behaving, and all that's determined by you trying to survive. So the kind of goal-directedness becomes part of the story about how your genes interact with the world, or something like that. Anyway, so
really it's like a combination of nature and nurture.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And part of nature even is not just, it's not just your, like, it's not a set program that you're given. So the picture of nature that we get from most of history of thinking about biology was like, you've got a fixed genetic program. Whereas it looks very much like what we've got is a very dynamic, active, self-organizing, self-regulating system that can do a million different things. And so the very character of nature is sort of being questioned, like what kind of thing is the nature that we've got. And it really looks much more active and flexible than anybody sort of thought 50 years ago or something like that. So anyway, little rant about my PhD advisor, who is a very sweet man, and I like him a lot. But he's one of the only people out there who are very seriously arguing that teleological explanations track something real in the world, rather than being a kind of convenient shorthand. And his argument goes through all of this kind of late 20th, early 21st century biology to make that case. So I'll talk about that in the next lecture.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I want to hear about that.
Cool. Cool. Anybody else got essay projects or thoughts on the philosophy of biology, the stuff from last week, or this week, I guess?
I'm just, basically right now I'm just dealing with SART and Heidelberg. But yeah.
I wrote about SART.
Yeah, that's what I did mine on too. And I'm sprinkling a little Beauvoir in there as well, because like it's an interesting topic. It's about like
Totally.
Transcendence and such. Or, like,
so we'll actually
individuality.
in the last lecture we'll actually come around to some of that stuff. We're going to talk about the meaning of life.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very excited for that one, because that's the kind of stuff I'm into.
Let's keep our expectations low. I'm definitely not going to tell you what the meaning of life is.
Well, it's 42, but
why would I sign up for this degree?
It's 42. Yeah, there it is.
I don't know. Yeah. So, well, I mean, if You got to go to grad school before they tell you what the meaning of life is. You got to go to grad school because they haven't got all the labor out of you that they're hoping for. So,
Oh, well, that's the main.
It's a very big question.
With your PhD, you know what meaning life is. It's to suffer.
sorry, I didn't hear that.
He's on the other side.
Okay, it's the answers. Albin says it's the answer to the question that tells you what the meaning of life. Oh, that's right. That's right. Right. Yes, the classic Douglas Adams. The question was the important thing.
Yeah. I love Douglas Adams. Oh my god. So every time someone like that whole subject's brought up, I have to say 42, even though it's probably not.
I mean,
People are
probably
looking
not.
for. No.
Probably not. But we will do some. We will do some of that work of trying to clarify what the question is.
Mhm.
Question from Quinn Davidson. Would I be able to write my essay on non-Western scientific practices or ways of understanding the world and compare them to Western scientific method and some demarcation criteria, as well as discuss the idea that science is a social construct and postmodernism, whether or not those practices yield valid results that could or should be considered scientific knowledge? You can do that. That's a lot, though. That's a lot to do in one essay. So very interesting. So you could even stop at the first sentence there and just do comparing Western scientific and non-Western scientific or knowledge producing processes. That's enough of an essay. Just compare those two. And then you can do some of this. So don't feel obliged to do demarcation if you don't want. You can if you've got something in mind for doing that, but just so part of me is not, I don't know. I'm more interested in the question of not what is science, but what is good knowledge producing processes. So if there's non-Western knowledge producing processes, like what matters is whether the knowledge is good and worthwhile, not whether it's scientific. So that's the kind of like, in some sense, the emptiness of Popper's demarcation criterion, because he doesn't give us a demarcation criterion that says this is the good stuff, right? This is high quality knowledge. He just says this is the stuff that we could show that it's wrong. So, I mean, you can do demarcation if you want, but I don't feel obliged. So just compare, just describe Western science and then describe some non-Western, and I'd recommend you sort of focus in on, I mean, non-Western is like non-blue, like it's most of the world is non-Western, right? Most of the history of culture has been non-Western in the sense of Western that we use it. So so focus in on some relatively specific knowledge generating process that you think counts as quite different than the scientific method as we usually understand it, and just compare them, and then maybe talk about whether you think that we should you're the last bit here, whether or not these practices yield valid results. So I would encourage you to talk about whether you think that the non-Western knowledge producing practices are good, rather than whether they're science. To my mind, that's a more interesting question, because science is just however people use that word, right? Like you can call something science or not as you please, but the real question is it good? Is it worth doing something like that? Albin, if I already have an email chain with you, should I ask here or wait until later? You can ask here if you want. That's cool. We got 12 minutes left in our meeting, and we seem to be we run through most of the main topics. So
How many people are still here?
Not that many. A decent percentage, though. I'm impressed with I thought I might be sitting here completely by myself. So
how many was it last time?
So I did all of my classes, all 3 of my classes, something like 200 students, and it was about a dozen people. But I had absolutely nothing prepared, and also didn't know how to use the program. So that's fine, I think. Yeah. Just waiting to see if Tim has a question. Yes. Right, so Tim's going to talk about reverse engineering science. No worries, no worries. Where Einstein's discovery with relativity weren't discoveries, but making sure that the theory was something. Yeah. Yeah. No worries. Yeah. Right, so trying to improve this, I think this is an interesting sort of group of topics that you could write on if you felt like trying to think about how the scientific method could be improved. And yeah, that sounds like a really interesting sort of, yeah. Discoveries, just seeing two different theories were wrong. Yeah. Yeah. Right, right. So you were interested, if I remember the email chain correctly, you were interested in talking about how we might want to try harder to figure out whether scientific theories are consistent within each other or whether theories are consistent with each other. Yeah, yeah. So it does sound like an interesting topic. I think that there's if you look at it from that perspective, so this is, I'm not discouraging you from writing about this, but if you look at it from the perspective of trying to find conflicts between scientific theories, there's a disturbing amount of conflict between scientific theories. Like, again, general relativity and quantum mechanics don't work together. They can't both be true. But nonetheless, they've been the dominant fundamental physical theories for like a century now, something like that. So we know that there are deep conflicts in our best scientific theories. So yeah, so there's definitely if you're hoping that science is a consistent and true set of beliefs about the world, you're going to be disappointed because it's just not. There's some interesting literature. Maybe I can dig this up for you. There's some interesting literature on models. So there are theories and laws, and there's also, people talk a lot about building models of some phenomena or something like that. And there seems to be different standards for models than for theories. So a scientific model is not required to be consistent with other models. You know, you build one model in which there is air resistance, you build another model in which there isn't air resistance. And that doesn't seem to worry anybody, but people aren't sure why it doesn't worry us. Why are we allowed to have models that conflict with each other in the way that they represent the world? So that might be interesting to think about in this context. So sort of like we certainly allow, it might be interesting, it might be helped to sort of refine what your topic is, because within theories, people seem to be perfectly okay with having a bunch of different models that don't agree with each other. It's when big theories conflict, like quantum mechanics, relativity, that we start getting a little nervous and say, okay, we need to sort of sort this out. So I don't believe it's consistent, but if there's an inconsistency, why would you build new theories on a model in which two conflicting topics are inconsistent? Well, it's a good question. And it sort of relates back to, potentially it relates back to the project that Nick is working on, which was scientific realism. So if you think that the job of our scientific theories is just to make good predictions, then you might be okay with inconsistent theories, right? So suppose that you don't believe our theory, the job of our theories is to be literally true. If that's right, then all you need is for them to work in a practical sense. Okay? So some people think that the job of a scientific theory is to be a true description of reality. Some people think that the job of scientific theory is to be good enough to make good enough predictions so that we can build cool stuff. So if you're one of the latter type of people and you think, look, the job here is just to be useful, then maybe you don't care if you have got two theories and they're inconsistent, but they both make good predictions. That might be good enough for you. But if you think their job is to be literally true descriptions of reality, that's probably not good enough for you. So that's maybe another angle on this stuff. Okay, but let's talk about it more over email. Yeah, let's think about this more in depth. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Any kind of closing questions or remarks before we call it a day? Horse business sort of stuff. For change, we came with this. It wasn't so hard to change a paradigm. For instance, when Einstein came with theory of relativity, it took 20 years before it was accepted. Yeah, it is very hard to change paradigms, and I think, as we said in class, sometimes it's science moves forward one funeral at a time. So 20 years is like the life cycle of a whole. It's how long it takes to be born and then get educated and sort of get to the point where you're starting to become a scientist. Don't worry, Tim, it's fine. But I should go fairly soon. But we should do this again. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we'll discuss it over email. And anybody else who would like to talk about their stuff over email, you'd be very welcome. I will put out a video kind of as soon as I can, hopefully the next couple of days, on functional explanations in biology. That's my next project. Okay. Okay.
I'll talk to you over email about some things from mine.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. And I'll put an announcement about what we've discussed about the exam and come up with some clearer criteria, clearer description of what exactly we'll be up to. Yeah? Okay. Sounds good. All right. It was great to chat with you all. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay sane.
Take care.
Go outside. Do go outside.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Good night. Bye. Yes.
What is time anyway?
It's not real, man.
Or something. No.